This is Part 2 Episode 180. Their method of pairing up was warmly received by the Mags as well. It also allowed the Mags to quickly become a part of the big family that the southeastern fort was, merging with the warrior harmoniously. On the battlefield, the Mags were the sharpest spear, while the warriors beside them were the toughest shields. As a result, as the spears of lightning rained down from the birdie demons, the shield warriors immediately made the defenses above the walls as tough as a tortoise's shell. Hiding behind them, the Mags could not even see the spears of lightning, covered up by the shields. The long spears directly bounced off the shields and fell back down the walls. There was a special characteristic about the spears of lightning from the birdie demons. Towards the back, there were 4 small fletches, which would ensure the spears to fly straight and not horizontally. However, these fletches had now become a nightmare for the berserk demons. The spears of lightning that bounced off the shields obviously could not identify friend from foe. Having just destroyed the 3 waves of magical beasts and suffered heavy losses, the berserk demons were now met with several thousand spears of lightning that rained down from the sky. They really did come, just too suddenly. At the same time, the demons had gone berserk. The ones who discovered the falling spears of lightning were able to react in time, but those who failed to discover the spears, or were careless, became the unlucky ones. Basically 2/3 of the 5,000 spears of lightning had been reflected below the walls. At least 1,000 berserk demons died, or were incapacitated by the spears of lightning. Miserable was no longer an appropriate word to describe this. However, the berserk demons were still berserk demons after all. After suffering heavy blows after heavy blows and losing over 4,000 of their clansmen, they continued to charge towards the walls of the southeastern fort. They arrived at the walls and immediately used the spikes on their arms to stab into the walls, so they could quickly climb up. Although the walls of the southeastern fort were rather tough, the berserk demons could scale it as long as they could gain the slightest footing using the spikes. Now, the walls that stood 100 meters tall were covered in berserk demons, while the demonic eye soldiers behind had finally arrived as well. There were over 13,000 demonic eye soldiers, with plenty of powerhouses among them. Although they were not as fast as the berserk demons, they were not slow either. After all, they had 3 legs. However, the demonic eye soldiers were not as mindless as the berserk demons. They were very clever. The reason why they did not charge into battle immediately was to let the berserk demons attack. Wouldn't they be safer once the humans on the walls were busy with the berserk demons? They had calculated the situation extremely well, which was why they only reached the walls just now. The leading demonic eye soldier had a total of 12 eyes. It produced a sharp screech. Immediately, all of the demonic eye soldiers fell into formation, and all of their eyes became fixed on the walls. Their demonic eyes could only launch straight beams. It was not particularly effective, as they had to attack from below, but the leader of the demonic eye soldiers was very clever. His objective was very simple, which was to directly attack the walls. Even if the walls of the southeastern fort were 100 meters thick, they would not be able to withstand several rounds of attacks from 13,000 demonic eye soldiers. Once the walls were breached, what was the southeastern fort supposed to use to stop the army of 500,000? Their method of attack was sly. And as soon as he had arrived, 10 eyes on the leading demonic eye soldiers had unleashed attacks, leaving behind a charred patch a meter deep in the walls. Without a doubt, he was indicating to the other demonic eye soldiers where to attack. If the demonic eye soldiers really did succeed in launching several waves of attack, it would definitely be quite a blow to the southeastern fort. The berserk demons had already begun climbing the walls now, while the birdie demons in the air responded cleverly as well, quickly dispersing from formation, and looking for any opportunities to attack. How was the southeastern fort supposed to stop these demonic eye soldiers now? Of course they had a wave, because the southeastern fort was no longer the battlefield of the warrior temple, but the battlefield of the temple union. A sharp whistle suddenly sounded from the walls, and before the demonic eye soldiers could understand what was going on, flocks of them collapsed like felled wheat. Figures actually emerged from the ground one after another, slaughtering the demonic eye soldiers at a close range. Assassins. They were assassins. There were over 10,000 assassins hidden below the walls. They had always been waiting patiently. They let the Berserk demon pass them, as their target were the demonic eye demons who used magic attacks. The demonic eye soldiers were huge and possessed 3 legs each, but they were truly magic troops. They were highly unskilled in close combat. They had never thought that the threat did not come from the southeastern fort, but from below their feet, launching fatal attacks at them just like the slinkers of their own race. The demonic eye soldiers had definitely been outsmarted. If they had accompanied the Berserk demons, then the Berserk demons could have provided them with some support. However, they had already fallen behind completely and they were a certain distance away from the walls as well, so it was impossible for the Berserk demons to realize they were in danger. 10,000 assassins. What kind of force was that? In basically under 3 minutes, all 13,000 demonic eye soldiers were annihilated by the assassins without a single left alive. If magic troops encountered assassins, what other fate could they suffer apart from death? It was no different from an assassin standing right behind a mage, with his dagger around the mage's neck. Watching the battle from afar, Samijina became stunned by this sight. He never would have dreamt that the end outcome of his army of 50,000 would be this. The humans clearly had prepared beforehand. The assassins clearly had been hiding there long before they had arrived. Or how could he have been fooled? Only then did Samijina realize the southeastern fort had been expecting their arrival, and had made sufficient preparations. The warrior temple's southeastern fort, that he believed only required 3 waves of full-powered attacks to penetrate it, had actually become so tough. And, the aspect that threatened him the most was the appearance and numbers of summoners, mags and assassins. Didn't the 6 human temples fight alone? Why would so many powerhouses from other temples appear in the southeastern fort? Just as the assassins launched their attacks, the Berserk demons on the walls were devastated as well. There were a portion of Berserk demons that made it onto the wall, but what awaited them were the sharp blades of the knights and warriors. How were they supposed to pose a threat to the southeastern fort with such measly numbers? They would require much more time and numbers if they even just wanted to whittle down their opponents. It was also at this moment that spikes grew from the walls of the southeastern fort. Long, earthen spikes sprouted from the walls without any prior signs. The Berserk demons had basically covered the entire wall when that happened. There were at least 3,000 Berserk demons simultaneously scaling the huge, wide wall, but in the next moment, all of them were pinned to death there. The 500 Earth Mags had held back until now. They had finally taken action. When the corpses of Berserk demons rained down from above, disturbing the demon army, the 10,000 assassins that had just ambushed the demonic eye soldiers ambushed from behind. Cooperating with them were bursting fireballs that fell from the sky. The Berserk demons, that amounted to 25,000 in number, had actually been surrounded under the southeastern fort. Even if Samijina wanted to save them, it was too late. Streaks of golden light constantly rained down, illuminating the injured assassins. With the support from the priests, the strength of the assassins increased by several-fold. They were stronger than the Berserk demons in the first place, and the Berserk demons had already descended into chaos. There was also support from the fire mags and priests above, so it was pointless of the assassins to suffer any further losses. The birdie demons in the air were not stupid. They could not approach the southeastern fort at all, or they would just become sitting ducks to the mags on the walls. The remaining 6,000 birdie demons immediately fled in terror, leaving behind a field of corpses below. A cheer immediately rang out from the southeastern fort like a tidal wave. Ranging from Chiao Yonghao to the regular soldiers, their emotions and morale had been set alight in that moment. Over all the years the humans fought against the demons, they had never been as elated like right now. As a matter of fact, even the original force that the southeastern fort possessed could not have been defeated by the wave of 50,000 demons earlier. However, it was definitely impossible for them to handle this attack of land and air without suffering any losses at all. The battle prowess of the Berserk demons and birdie demons was extraordinary, not to mention they were combined with a large number of demonic eye soldiers as well. They were all elites among the demons. However, it was different this time. Under the combined efforts of the 6 different vocations, the battle had already ended even without the priests fighting. It was a complete victory. The Berserk demons and demonic eye soldiers were completely annihilated, while they had almost lost half of the birdie demons as well. With such great losses, even the commander of the army, Samijina, became rather furious. That was almost a tenth of their strength. Even though it was not truly their main forces, it was still a very important portion of their strength. This was the advantage that came with the 6 vocations working together. The combination of multiple vocations was far more effective than the 6 temples fighting alone. This was the first time the advantage of the union had been demonstrated on the battlefield, which also brought ease to the powerhouses of the 6 vocations in the southeastern fort. Their overall strength was not as great as the demons, but under their combined efforts, it would be difficult for the demons to breach the mountain pass. The information that had arrived in time allowed them to make sufficient preparations. Samijina's face paled in anger as his eyes shone viciously. Send the dual-headed demon eagles into battle with the birdie demons. Also send the blazing lions, demonic wolves, and panther demons. Have the demon carriers support them. Have the dike demons conceal themselves and head out. I'd like to see how many more traps they have. Garp, Stolas, Phoenix, head into battle and support the army. Even if you can't take the southeastern fort, I want you to create a breach. Yes. 3 demon gods appeared from behind. After greeting Samijina politely, they shot off 3 streaks of light. The demon army set off once more. Whether it was quality or quantity, the demon army this time had visibly improved. They amounted to over 100,000 and rushed towards southeastern fort once again, over land and in air. The demonic wolves and panther demons quickly charged forward under the protection of the huge blazing lions along the ground, while the birdie demons, that had been repelled earlier, regrouped with the dual-headed demon eagles to form a stronger attack in the air. Most importantly, over a dozen demon carriers appeared among them. Not only were the demon carriers the fastest aerial magic troops among the demons, they could also incapacitate their opponents. Their disgusting mucus could strike fear into the heart of any human, regardless of vocation. Moreover, the army was led by demon gods this time. It was completely different from the probing attacks of before. Looking at the terrifying demon army in the distance, Chiao Yonghao could not help but change in expression. If it was in the past, a demon army like this could make the southeastern fort suffer heavy losses, or even come close to falling. The demon gods all varied in size and shape, but rarely did they ever appear on the battlefield. As a result, even as the previous temple head of the warrior temple, Chiao Yonghao was unable to tell the strength of these 3 demon gods. However, he could tell from the 3 shining demon god pillars in the distance that these demon gods definitely did not rank toward the bottom. Don't worry, temple head Chiao. I know these 3 demon gods, Yi Sanmi said steadily from beside Chiao Yonghao. All of the eternal heroes currently wore a large cloak, which covered their bodies. Listening to Yi Sanmi's calm voice, Chiao Yonghao could not help but become rather ashamed. Before the powerful demons, he was still unable to remain at ease. That's the 33rd demon god, Garp, the 36th demon god, Stolas, and the 37th demon god, Phoenix. These 3 specialize in support and magic, so they can play quite a large role on the battlefield. Their individual battle prowess is SOSO. Yi Sanmi might have slumbered for several thousand years, but his understanding of the demon gods was still better than the important members of the warrior temple. Aside from the demon god emperor, the names of all the demon gods would never change. In other words, no matter which generation of moon demon god it was, they would all be Visago, while the star demon gods would all be called Visago. This was why he could name the 3 demon gods. Mentioning their names, information regarding these 3 demon gods immediately flashed through Chiao Yonghao's head. He said sternly, Garp's known as the arcane demon god. He's skilled in arcane magic, and is skilled in large-scale support. Among the 72 demon gods, he's basically the only demon god that purely focuses on support. His personal strength is very weak, but to be able to rank 33rd, his supporting ability is clearly very powerful. Stolas is known as the demon god of curses. He's skilled in various curses, which makes him extremely troublesome. Phoenix is known as the dark phoenix. He's skilled in fire and darkness magic. Although he ranks the lowest out of the 3 of them, he has the strongest combat prowess. After reciting the abilities of the three demon gods, Qiu Yonghao's heart weighed slightly heavier. These three demon gods could definitely play a terrifying role on the battlefield, but it also demonstrated that Sami Jina was unable to truly remain calm after the failure from before. This wave of attack would not be easy to stop. Leave Garb and the demon carriers to me. Yi Sanmi said indifferently, the demons don't know about our existence, so I'll give them a present. However, that'll be my only opportunity. As a result, I can only take care of one of the three demon gods. Once I attack one of them, the other two will definitely undergo the demon god transformation. This will be a tough battle. As they discussed the battle tactic, the demon army in the distance drew closer and closer. The arcane demon god Garb seemed no different from a human. Long, navy hair dropped down his back as he wore luxurious, silver robes. However, he seemed rather wretched, with a large, hooked nose and bulbous eyes. He also carried a thick blue magic staff. He flew by controlling the elements in the air. He did not use any wings at all. As he flew, Garb chanted to himself. Very soon, navy light enveloped the demon army below. Immediately, almost 10,000 demons at the very front were enveloped by this blue light, and they suddenly charged forward with much greater speed. Arcane magic, agility boost. As a user of purely supportive magic, the arcane demon god Garb could cover an extremely large range with his magic. There was not a single human mage that could match him. He used the magic extremely quickly. After boosting the agility of the demon troops, another red light enveloped the blazing lions, demonic wolves and panther demons. This was a strength boost. And this was only a beginning. If he was allowed to continually cast his arcane magic, the battle prowess of the demon army would double at the very least, while their tenacity on the battlefield would drastically increase as well. And this was under the circumstance that Garb had yet to undergo the demon god transformation. The demon god transformation could only last a limited amount of time. Clearly, he wanted to use it when it was most crucial. However, what he did not know was that he had already become Yi Sanmi's target. Opposed to Garb, Stolas and Phoenix had yet to take action, because their range was nowhere as great as Garb's and it was used against the enemy. As a result, they needed to get closer to the southeastern fort before they could use it. Garb was still another 5 kilometers away from the southeastern fort. Even for single targeting curses, there were barely any that could reach so far, so he did not feel that he was under any danger at all. On the walls of the southeastern fort, Yi Sanmi removed his cloak, which revealed an old face. His grey skin gave off a somewhat metallic luster, but his eyes were very special. They did not seem to belong to an undead at all. His pair of green eyes were bright and piercing. Only in their very depths could tiny green flames be seen leaping about. Yi Sanmi lifted his hand and grabbed at the air. Immediately, a huge bow appeared in his arms. The bow was even longer than his body. It was dark golden, but the bowstring shone with faint, seven-colored light. As soon as the bow appeared, Qiu Yonghao, who was only inches away from it, felt like his soul was being sucked away. There were many magnificent patterns on the bow, but it was all hidden away by the dark golden luster. Yi Sanmi held the bow by the center with his left hand and slowly raised it before him. He grabbed the bowstring with his right hand and just slowly drew it without an arrow. As he began drawing the arrow, Qiu Yonghao instinctively staggered a few steps back. The other people around him were forced to make some room as well. It was as if an invisible air stream now surrounded Yi Sanmi, rising up like a flame. As the bow was drawn, it also emitted their invisible flow of air, but strangely enough, both the dark golden color of the bow, or the seven-colored light from the bowstring dimmed. They became inconspicuous. Was this a divine tool? Qiu Yonghao had great knowledge and wisdom, so he could tell the bow was extraordinary from the first glance. He could not help but gasp. The eternal hero actually possessed a divine tool. Not only was this an ancient divine tool, it seemed to be related to the ancient elves, because the pattern on the bow was something special to the ancient elves. Qiu Yonghao was unable to tell what it detailed, but he could tell that it was related to the elves. Garp's third arcane spell was completely very soon. He was a standalone demon god, without his own clan. As a result, he was not concerned by the deaths of the berserk demons and demonic eye soldiers earlier. He was just disdainful towards Samajina's commands. As the arcane demon god, he personally believed he was the best at controlling entire situations, but just because he did not possess any personal prowess, he had never been able to lead at the front lines. As a result, he felt bitter over this inability. It was finally time for him to enter the battlefield. Garp could finally vent this feeling of bitterness and have a great go at it, where he would show the other demon clans just how powerful his pure supportive abilities were. It was also at this moment that Garp's heart suddenly tightened. He automatically stopped the spell he was chanting. He only felt like a great, invisible hand had grabbed his heart, causing him indescribable pain. He could not help but grunt. He instinctively looked in the direction of the southeastern fort. What he saw were a pair of jade-green eyes and a huge bow. Impossible. How can an arrow reach me from so far away? Just as Garp felt speechless from shock and refused to believe that he could be attacked at such a range, a green fire shot into the sky from the top of the walls, reaching an altitude of over 100 meters. The ball of fire that had suddenly appeared made the demons jump in fright. Afterwards, a speck of seven-colored light shot over like a bolt of lightning from the green light in the air. "I'm the target." Garp roared in realization inside, as the sense of danger made him immediately use the power of his demon god pillar. The demon god pillar that belonged to the arcane demon god immediately shone, with navy light, within the demon encampment. Symbols lit up on the pillar like they had been revived, and they immediately rose up into the air, forming an even larger symbol which rushed towards Garp. However, it was still a little too late by the time Garp had reacted. The moment the speck of seven-colored light had been shot from the bow, the air within 100 meters of Yisanmi hummed. The seven-colored light only flew 100 meters away before completely vanishing. Garp had used the demon god transformation extremely quickly, but just as the huge, navy symbol arrived behind him, even in the moment when it was about to fuse with his body, the air before him ripped open, and a speck of seven-colored light immediately emerged. What Garp could do in time was to block with the huge, blue staff in his hands. However, in the next moment, the speck of light vanished once more. The huge symbols behind Garp quickly merged into his body, allowing his body to rapidly swell. Over 100 different symbols appeared around him and revolved around him as well. These were symbols created from arcane magic. Having undergone the demon god transformation, Garp's arcane magic became twice as powerful as before. However, the arcane demon god just hovered there without moving. His eyes were blank as he gazed off into the distance just like before. They were filled with disbelief. The demon god of curses Stolas and the dark phoenix demon god Phoenix also sensed something was off, and they used their demon god transformations without hesitation. Stolas produced a core, and his pair of black wings immediately unfurled. Under the illumination of the orange-red demon god pillar in the distance, his turned into a huge crow with a wingspan of 10 meters. Both his eyes and beak were orange-red. The dark phoenix demon god Phoenix's demon god transformation was much more fancy. He became over 20 meters long with his wings even wider than that. Dark golden imprint of flames appeared on his magnificent black body. He had become a phoenix of darkness. However, their demon god transformations failed to affect Garp. Just as they transformed, slivers of seven-colored light began to pour out from Garp's body. Afterwards, with a bang, Garp's body exploded with seven-colored light under the protection of all the arcane symbols. It scared Stolas and Phoenix into quickly dodging. The arcane demon god Garp, that ranked 33rd, became the first demon god to fall in this battle. Samijina, who originally sat on the commander's seat, suddenly stood up as shock appeared in his eyes. While Garp was not skilled in battle, his cultivation had still reached the third rank of the 9th step. If he underwent the demon god transformation, his battle prowess could even reach the 5th rank of the 9th step, and his supportive abilities would become extremely powerful. However, he had just been instantly slain like that. Didn't they say that the warrior temple had no divine tools? However, the seven-colored light earlier clearly could only be emitted by a divine tool. Was it a divine tool bow? Without a doubt, the most terrifying divine tool on the battlefield would be a magic staff that could amplify magic, but in terms of posing the greatest threat to an individual, nothing outshone a bow. Once a divine tool bow had appeared, it would pose a huge threat to basically any demon god. Even the demon god of death Samijina, who ranked 4th, would not be an exception to this. The northeastern fort had become much more difficult to take than he imagined it to be. Samijina could not help but have his expression become very warped. Thwang! The huge bow drooped, while Yi Sanmi's left hand which held onto the bow remained very still. However, the light in his eyes had dimmed. Clearly, it had not been easy for him to shoot the arrow that could instantly kill a demon god. However, the arrow boosted the morale of the southeastern fort by an unbelievable amount. The enemy army had arrived. As a powerful clan that was a fusion between magic and biology, the Blazing Lions immediately launched fireballs at the walls. At the same time, they used their huge but tough bodies to protect the demonic wolves and panther demons. The Earth Mags used the Falling Stone spell, bombarding the surroundings before the walls. The elemental stones would automatically vanish after landing on the ground. They would not become rocks that the demons could use to climb. The combined efforts of the 500 Earth Mags temporarily stopped the advance of the enemies below. However, the demonic wolves were tenacious and powerful in battle, while the panther demons were fast as well. As a result, the damage that the Falling Stone spell could cause was limited. It could only prevent them from attacking the walls. After Yi Sanmi's arrow, Qiu Yonghao completely recovered his composure and passed down orders one after another. The edge of the walls were covered by shield warriors, while the Knight army had already gathered in the city, ready to charge out into battle at any time. Knights would only be most effective out in the open. The mission of the Fire Mags was to handle the aerial forces from the demons. The dual-headed demon eagles and birdie demons arrived at the same time. The birdie demons were used physical attacks, while the dual-headed demon eagles could use darkness and fire magic, as well as physical attacks to a certain extent. They posed an extremely great threat to the southeastern fort. However, the influence of Yi Sanmi's arrow was just too great, so these flying demons clearly slowed down drastically. Even the demon god of curses Stolas and the dark phoenix demon god Phoenix did not approach the walls. Even after using the demon god transformation, they were not completely confident that they could avoid the terrifying attack from the divine bow. Although Yi Sanmi had only slain a single demon god, it was possible to say that he alone had completely minimized the effects of the 3 demon gods on the battlefield. Samijina had already stood up. He commanded the battle, Bifrons, Hargenti, go assist Stolas and Phoenix. Yes, 2 burly figures shot off from Samijina's side with a flash and charged into the battlefield. One of the figures was an iron-black color, while the other was a brownish-yellow. Ranked 46th, the monster demon god Bifrons stood 10 meters tall. He looked like an enlarged baboon. His close combat prowess was extraordinary, but he did not know any magic. With a tough body, his defense was shocking. Ranked 48th, the ox demon god of terror Hagenti was a huge ox. He was one of the few demon gods that was most skilled in defense. Samijina's objective in sending them out was very simple. He wanted them to protect the demon god of curses and dark phoenix demon god, who had weaker defenses, so their magic could be unleashed to their fullest potential, which would allow them to turn the disadvantageous situation around. It would be much easier for the monster demon god and ox demon god to handle the arrows. Just when Samijina sent the 2 demon gods as reinforcements, the battle for the fort had completely unfolded. Without nothing else to follow up the Earth Mage spells, the demonic wolves and panther demons began their full-scale assault on the walls. They were both the primary forces among the demons, as their strength was relatively stronger. The Blazing Lions were slightly less proficient at climbing, but once they made it on the walls, they would pose a huge threat to the warriors on there. The shield warriors stood at the very front valiantly and collided with the demonic wolves and panther demons. Although the warrior temple was the weakest out of the 6 temples, it was also the most numerous. With the shield warriors at the front and the berserkers at the back, they engaged in a battle to the death against the demonic wolves and panther demons. All of the higher-ups of the warrior temple appeared on the battlefield. No matter how powerful the demonic wolves and panther demons were, they still paled in comparison to warriors of the sixth step and higher. A huge, golden sword swept over the top of the walls. On the walls that spanned several hundred meters across, all of the demonic wolves, panther demons and the few blazing lions that had just made it up were bisected. This was Chiao Yonghao's attack. The warriors above the eighth step were all standing on the battlements, preventing the demonic wolves and panther demons from passing them. However, the attacks from the demons in the air also arrived. The magic from the dual-headed eagle demons, and spears of lightning from the birdie demons constantly rained down on the southeastern fort. The armies of the Temple Union began suffering losses. Fortunately, Chiao Yonghao's battle tactic of pairing up the troops was very successfully. The mags were protected very well, but the aerial demons fought back rather powerfully as well. What surprised Sami Jina was that for some reason, the defensive weapon that usually possessed the greatest power, the magic cannons, were not used at all. They seemed to have vanished completely, which allowed the aerial demon army to fight even harder. Spurt. A warrior strangely collapsed on the ground, with a slit throat, and immediately a hole appeared on the walls. However, it was quickly plugged by a berserker using his body. Mags use scouting techniques. There are dike demons. Scouting techniques lit up on the city walls, and as expected, a large number of dike demons appeared on the battlefield among the demonic wolves and panther demons. Even when they were illuminated by the scouting techniques, the invisible dike demons were like transparent wisps of smoke, making it very difficult to discover them. The losses on the walls immediately increased as a result. In the air, the monster demon god and ox demon god had finally arrived. Under their protection, Phoenix and Stolas could finally approach the walls of the fort. They were both preparing their magic as well. Having reached this point, the demons had finally gained an upper hand through the strength of their land and air troops. A ball of dim, green light suddenly became the center of attention. As it fell from the sky, a twisted tunnel appeared. Stola's eyes were vicious. Die, you damn humans. You've actually killed Garp. I'd like to see how you deal with my swamp of corrosion now. The name was very simple, but it was a true forbidden spell, a forbidden spell filled with the might of curses. It did not target people, but the wall. However, at this very moment, a fire-red figure suddenly leapt up from the walls. A pair of huge, fire wings unfurled and pushed his body towards the green light in a flash. The weapon in his hands was a spear. The spear thrust forwards and a transparent, red crystal suddenly appeared on the tip of the spear. The red crystal just stabbed into the green ball of light, and the light halted in the air, as if it was about to explode. However, the red crystal exploded first. Flames that mixed red and green immediately rose up, and the sky turned into a huge cluster of fire. Afterwards, the fire-red figure that had flown up into the air thrusted his spear at the distant sky. Part 2 end here.